The letter came without warning. No knock at the door. No polite introduction. No handshake welcoming him to the community. Just a single envelope tucked inside his mailbox. White paper, black ink. The words pressed hard into the page, as if the writer wanted the pressure of their pen to stab through. At first glance, Derek Whitfield thought it was junk mail. Another advertisement for lawn care, roofing repairs, or someone selling solar panels. But when he slid his thumb across the seal and unfolded the crisp sheet of paper, he realized this was no ordinary letter. At the top, bold, centered, and official, Homeowners Association of Red Rock Estates. His heart sank as his eyes darted down the page. You are hereby ordered to sell your property within 72 hours due to violations of community policy. Failure to comply will result in penalties, fines, and possible legal action. The paper trembled slightly in his hand as he reached the bottom. The signature was there in looping, practiced handwriting. Marjorie Klein, President, Red Rock Estates HOA. Derek read it once, twice, a third time. Each repetition felt like someone tightening a rope around his chest. Sell his ranch? In 72 hours? Over what? He blinked hard and stepped back from the mailbox, the cool Colorado wind tugging at the paper. His ranch stretched behind him. Miles of open pasture framed by weathered fences. A sky so wide it made you feel both small and infinite at the same time. His 3 horses grazed lazily in the paddock. Cattle moved slow and steady in the distance. Everything about this place was his dream come true. And now, some stranger with a title wanted to rip it from him in 3 days flat? Absurd. Impossible. Unacceptable. But deep down, Derek knew this wasn't about rules or regulations. This was about control. And if he didn't act fast, he could lose everything he'd worked for. That night, Derek tossed the letter onto the kitchen table with a sharp slap. His wife, Cynthia, turned from the stove, a wooden spoon still in her hand. "What's wrong?" she asked, reading his expression before she read the page. He didn't answer. Instead, he pushed the paper toward her. She skimmed quickly, her lips pressing tighter and tighter as she reached the bottom. 72 hours? Who does she think she is? The president of the HOA, Derek muttered, sinking into his chair. But she doesn't own me. Cynthia set the spoon down and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. This is insane. You've followed every zoning law. You've maintained the fences. You paid every fee at closing. What could she possibly be basing this on? Power, Derek said flatly. She's testing me. For a long moment, the room was quiet except for the faint hiss of the kettle. Derek's eyes drifted to the window where the last colors of sunset stretched over the fields. That land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was his blood, his sweat, his sacrifice. He had worked 20 years in construction, picked up overtime shifts, saved every spare penny just to buy it. Now, a stranger in a pressed blazer thought she could snatch it away with a letter? Not a chance. The next morning, Derek woke with resolve burning in his chest. He wasn't going to ignore this. He wasn't going to be bullied. But first, he needed to understand what exactly he was up against. At the county clerk's office, he combed through property records, zoning approvals, HOA bylaws, page after page of dense legal jargon. Everything about his purchase checked out. His land was zoned agricultural. His livestock was permitted. His fencing met the required height. Every I was dotted, every T crossed. So why the letter? One line in the HOA charter caught his attention. Buried deep in the rules was a vague clause. The HOA reserves the right to determine if a property negatively impacts the harmony of the community. Harmony. A word as soft as silk, but as dangerous as a blade. It was a loophole, one that gave Marjorie and her board unchecked authority. That evening, Derek decided he needed answers straight from the source. He marched up the stone path to Marjorie Klein's house. A pristine 2-story painted beige, shutters trimmed in dark green, the kind of home that looked like it belonged on the cover of a suburban magazine. Not a blade of grass out of place. Not a flower bed left untended. Derek raised his fist and knocked. The door creaked open to reveal a woman in her late 50s. hair pinned in a perfect bun, glasses perched at the edge of her nose. She looked him up and down slowly, her lips curling in faint amusement. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, her voice smooth but sharp. "I was expecting you." He held up the letter. "You want to explain this?" "There's nothing to explain," she replied calmly. "You're in violation of community harmony standards. Your livestock, your fencing, it doesn't align with the aesthetic values of Red Rock Estates. You were sent notice. Now you must comply." "Aesthetic values?" Derek nearly laughed. "Lady, this is agricultural land. I followed every law, every requirement. You don't get to just decide I have to sell because you don't like how it looks." Marjorie's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Whitfield, rules exist to keep order. And as president, it's my duty to enforce them." "Enforce them or abuse them?" Derek shot back. Her expression hardened. "Be careful with your words. You wouldn't want to make this more difficult than it already is." Derek's jaw clenched. "You picked the wrong man to push around." For a moment, silence hung between them, thick as a storm cloud. Then Marjorie leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. 72 hours, she said. Tick, tick, tick. And then she shut the door. What Derek didn't know in that moment was that this letter wasn't just a bluff. It was the opening move in a battle that had been brewing for years. A battle that would pit one man's dream against the unchecked power of an HOA president who thought she was untouchable. So the question is, would Derek find the strength to fight back and protect everything he'd built? Or would Marjorie's empire swallow his dream whole? Stick around, because what Derek uncovers next doesn't just shake Marjorie's authority. It threatens to unravel the entire foundation of the HOA itself. And before we dive into that, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss the twists, turns, and shocking revelations still to come. Derek sat at the back of the crowded community hall, his arms folded, his eyes fixed on the stage. The room smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. Folding chairs squeaked as neighbors shifted, whispering in low tones, throwing the occasional glance his way. This wasn't his idea of a peaceful evening. But after Marjorie Klein's smug threat at her doorstep, Derek knew there was no choice. If she wanted a fight, this was where it began. Publicly, in front of the very people she claimed to represent. At the front of the room, a long table was set with neat stacks of paper, a pitcher of water, and 3 name placards. In the center sat Marjorie, pristine as ever, her blazer pressed, her pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights. To her left, an older man with thinning gray hair flipped through documents. To her right, a younger woman tapped away on a laptop, her heels clicking impatiently against the floor. The meeting began with pleasantries, reports on landscaping contracts, complaints about parking, discussions on holiday decorations. Derek could barely focus. Each topic felt like a distraction, a performance carefully crafted to lull the room into compliance. Then, finally, Marjorie's voice rang out. Next order of business, Mr. Derek Whitfield and his property concerns. The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward Derek. Some curious, some suspicious, a few sympathetic, but all waiting. Derek rose from his chair slowly, the letter folded neatly in his hand. He walked to the center aisle, his boots echoing against the linoleum floor. His pulse thudded in his ears, but his voice was steady. I received this notice, he said, holding up the paper. It says I have 72 hours to sell my ranch. I want to know who here believes that's fair. Who here thinks it's legal? Murmurs rippled through the room. A man in the second row whispered something to his wife. A young mother shook her head, clearly uncomfortable. Marjorie leaned forward, her smile thin and practiced. Mr. Whitfield, your property is in clear violation of our community harmony standards. Your livestock, your fencing. It disrupts the aesthetic we work hard to maintain here at Red Rock Estates. Aesthetic, Derek repeated, his voice rising. This is agricultural land, zoned for farming, approved for livestock. Every law, every regulation followed to the letter. Show me where in the bylaws it says I can't keep animals on land designed for them. The older man beside Marjorie cleared his throat. Mr. Whitfield, the clause regarding harmony gives the board discretion. Discretion, Derek cut in. That's just another word for abuse of power. You don't like the way my ranch looks, so you think you can force me out? A few people in the crowd nodded. A woman near the back muttered, "He's right." Marjorie's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed. Mr. Whitfield, we appreciate your passion, but rules exist for a reason. If we let one property break from the standards, soon the entire community suffers. Property values decline. Neighbors grow resentful. Chaos spreads. Derek took a step closer to the stage, his voice firm. What's really declining is fairness. What's spreading is fear. You think people here don't notice? You think they don't see the way you throw your weight around, bending the rules when it suits you? The room grew tense. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath. Marjorie leaned back in her chair, tapping a manicured finger against the table. Careful, Mr. Whitfield. That sounds like an accusation. It is, Derek said plainly. The silence that followed was electric. Finally, a man from the audience spoke up. He's got a point. Last year you fined us for putting up a shed, when 2 others had the same thing. And she made us repaint our fence, another woman added. Voices began to rise. People who had once sat quietly now shared stories, frustrations, small injustices they'd swallowed in silence. The room shifted, the tide turning against Marjorie. For the first time, her calm facade cracked. She raised her voice above the crowd. Order. This meeting will remain orderly, or I will adjourn immediately. The younger woman at her side whispered frantically, tapping on her laptop. The older man wiped his forehead nervously. Derek seized the moment. You see? He called out. The second people speak up, she threatens to shut it all down. This isn't about harmony. This is about control. And I won't let her bully me or anyone else off their land. Applause broke out from one corner of the room. It wasn't loud at first, but it grew, spreading like sparks catching dry grass. Marjorie slammed her gavel against the table. Enough! This meeting is adjourned. The sound echoed, sharp and final. But as neighbors filed out, their whispers carried a new tone. Doubt, frustration, defiance. And Derek knew in that moment he wasn't alone. But Marjorie wasn't done. Behind that thin smile and clipped words, she was already planning her next move. A move far more dangerous than a letter. Because when Derek returned home that night, he discovered something that proved this fight wasn't just about property lines anymore. It was about secrets buried deep in the foundation of Red Rock Estates. And those secrets, they were worth far more than the land itself. So before we uncover the shocking truth Derek found, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss what comes next. The night after the HOA meeting, Derek sat at his kitchen table long after Cynthia had gone to bed. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator. In front of him lay a mess of documents. Property deeds, zoning maps, and every scrap of paper he had pulled from the county clerk's office earlier that day. He traced his finger across highlighted passages, searching for patterns. Something didn't sit right. If Marjorie and her board really wanted him gone, why rely on such a flimsy clause about harmony? Why not cite something stronger, something enforceable? Unless they weren't following the law at all. The thought gnawed at him. Around midnight, frustration boiling, Derek shoved the papers aside and leaned back in his chair. That's when he noticed it. An envelope at the bottom of the pile he hadn't opened yet. It wasn't official, just a plain white folder with a sticky note that read, Filed Addendum, 2018. Curious, he flipped it open. Inside were minutes from an old HOA meeting, one most residents had probably forgotten. But buried in the dry language was a vote. A narrow approval of a land use adjustment that shifted certain lots from agricultural to restricted residential. Derek's eyes widened. His ranch sat right at the edge of that map. And though his parcel was still technically zoned agricultural by the county, the HOA had quietly tried to reclassify it years earlier. It was a smoking gun. But why? What did they stand to gain by forcing farmland into residential rules? The next morning, Derek drove back to the clerk's office. He requested financial disclosures for the HOA, a tedious stack of receipts and contracts. As he sifted through the files, a particular name kept appearing: Red Rock Development Group. Landscaping contracts, road repairs, even legal services. Every other page seemed to tie back to them. And then he saw it: a land purchase agreement. Red Rock Development had quietly acquired 2 large parcels just north of his ranch. Vacant land. Cheap. Worth far more if surrounding properties could be converted into upscale residential lots. Suddenly it clicked. Marjorie didn't care about harmony. She didn't care about livestock, fences, or aesthetics. She wanted him gone because his ranch stood in the way of a development deal. If Derek sold or was forced out, his land would be the missing piece. The final puzzle tile in a much larger plan. That evening, Derek laid the documents out for Cynthia. She read carefully, her brow furrowing. "So they've been planning this for years," she said softly. "This isn't about rules. It's about money." "Exactly," Derek replied. "They don't want neighbors. They want investors." Cynthia looked up at him, her eyes filled with worry. "If this is true, you're not just fighting Marjorie anymore. You're fighting developers with money, lawyers, and connections." Derek clenched his jaw. "Then we fight smarter." 2 nights later, Derek returned to the community hall. It was dark, empty, locked for the night. But Derek wasn't there for a meeting. Using a small flashlight, he walked the perimeter until he found a cracked window frame near the back. With a careful push, it slid open. He climbed inside, his boots landing softly on the polished floor. Every instinct told him this was dangerous. If caught, he could face charges. But something in his gut told him the truth was hidden here, in the files Marjorie and her board didn't want anyone to see. He crept toward the records room, the beam of his flashlight sweeping across filing cabinets. His hands trembled as he flipped open drawers, rifling through manila folders. And then he found it. A folder labeled simply, "Confidential Development." Inside were letters, emails, even signed memorandums. One line jumped out immediately. "Once Whitfield property is acquired, Phase 2 expansion may proceed. Estimated profit margins: 3 million. Derek's stomach dropped. This wasn't speculation. This was proof. They had targeted him long before he even moved in. His land wasn't just inconvenient, it was essential to their project. Suddenly, the creak of a door echoed through the hall. Derek froze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, approaching closer. He killed the flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, clutching the folder tightly. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. A shadow stretched across the floor. Someone else was here. Derek thought he was alone. But he wasn't. And when he realized who had followed him into that dark hall, the truth about the HOA's corruption became even more dangerous. Because now it wasn't just about land deals or secret files. It was about survival. So before we reveal who stepped out of that shadow, make sure you hit subscribe right now. You won't want to miss the moment everything turns from a fight over property into a fight for Derek's life. The air inside the darkened community hall felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Derek pressed his back flat against the cold plaster, the stolen folder clutched to his chest. His flashlight was off, his heart hammering so loudly, he swore the intruder could hear it. Footsteps echoed across the floor. Slow, steady, deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't wandering. They were searching. Derek edged sideways along the wall, his boots barely grazing the tiles. He prayed for silence, but every creak of the building sounded amplified. Then a voice cut through the darkness. "I know you're here, Whitfield." Derek's blood ran cold. The beam of a flashlight snapped on, blinding in the blackness. It swept the hall, darting across chairs and tables before stopping near the records room door. Derek ducked low, sliding behind a stack of folded chairs, his breathing shallow. The voice came again, deeper this time. "You think you're clever? You think you can dig where you don't belong?" It wasn't Marjorie. It wasn't one of her board members. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his silhouette sharp against the glow of the flashlight. Derek recognized him. He'd seen the man's truck parked near Marjorie's home before. Contractor, maybe, or muscle. Either way, he wasn't here by accident. The man stepped further inside, boots thudding against the linoleum. He swung the flashlight toward the far corner, away from Derek for just a second. That's when Derek moved. Sliding out from cover, he crouched low and slipped behind the man, his pulse surging with adrenaline. Each step felt like it could shatter the silence. The man paused suddenly, turning his head. "You can't hide forever." Derek froze mid-step. The light swung dangerously close. For one terrifying heartbeat, it hovered over the edge of Derek's boot. Then it shifted away again, scanning the opposite side of the hall. Seizing the chance, Derek darted toward the exit. His boots struck the floor harder than he wanted, the sound bouncing through the room. "Hey!" the man barked. The beam whipped around. Derek sprinted. He hit the back door with his shoulder, bursting into the cool night air. Gravel crunched beneath his feet as he ran, lungs burning, folder gripped tight. Behind him, the man gave chase. Derek's truck sat parked under a lone street lamp. He fumbled for the keys, hands slick with sweat. The man's footsteps pounded closer. Derek shoved the folder onto the passenger seat, jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Headlights blazed, illuminating his pursuer. A thick-set man with a scar cutting across his cheek, his expression twisted with rage. It swept the hall, darting across chairs and tables before stopping near the records room door. Derek ducked low, sliding behind a stack of folded chairs, his breathing shallow. The voice came again, deeper this time. "You think you're clever? You think you can dig where you don't belong?" It wasn't Marjorie. It wasn't one of her board members. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his silhouette sharp against the glow of the flashlight. Derek recognized him. He'd seen the man's truck parked near Marjorie's home before. Contractor, maybe, or muscle. Either way, he wasn't here by accident. The man stepped further inside, boots thudding against the linoleum. He swung the flashlight toward the far corner, away from Derek for just a second. That's when Derek moved. Sliding out from cover, he crouched low and slipped behind the man, his pulse surging with adrenaline. Each step felt like it could shatter the silence. The man paused suddenly, turning his head. "You can't hide forever." Derek froze mid-step. The light swung dangerously close. For one terrifying heartbeat, it hovered over the edge of Derek's boot. Then it shifted away again, scanning the opposite side of the hall. Seizing the chance, Derek darted toward the exit. His boots struck the floor harder than he wanted, the sound bouncing through the room. "Hey!" the man barked. The beam whipped around. Derek sprinted. He hit the back door with his shoulder, bursting into the cool night air. Gravel crunched beneath his feet as he ran, lungs burning, folder gripped tight. Behind him, the man gave chase. Derek's truck sat parked under a lone street lamp. He fumbled for the keys, hands slick with sweat. The man's footsteps pounded closer. Derek shoved the folder onto the passenger seat, jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Headlights blazed, illuminating his pursuer. A thick-set man with a scar cutting across his cheek, his expression twisted with rage. Cynthia froze halfway up the stairs, her hand gripping the railing. "Nobody comes out here this late," she whispered. Another knock, harder this time. Derek grabbed the revolver he kept in the drawer, an old family piece, more for comfort than show, and stepped to the door. He didn't open it immediately. "Who is it?" he called. A pause, then a voice low but urgent. "My name's Claire. I used to work with Marjorie. Please, you need to let me in. They're watching me." Derek and Cynthia exchanged a glance, suspicion tangled with curiosity. Slowly, Derek cracked the door. On the porch stood a woman in her 40s, hair pulled into a messy bun, eyes darting nervously at the tree line. She clutched a worn leather bag to her chest like it was life itself. "Please," she whispered. "I don't have much time." Derek hesitated only a moment before pulling her inside and locking the door behind her. They sat around the kitchen table, the folder of stolen documents between them. Claire placed her bag down and drew out a stack of papers even thicker. "I used to be the HOA secretary," she said, her voice trembling. "I kept minutes, filed contracts. I saw everything. But when I started asking questions about Red Rock development, Marjorie told me to keep quiet. Then strange cars started parking outside my house at night. I quit before things got worse." She slid one of the papers across to Derek. It was an email chain, Marjorie to Red Rock executives, negotiating favorable terms for rezoning. Derek's jaw tightened. She was selling us out. Claire nodded. It wasn't just her. 3 board members are on Red Rock's payroll. They've been promised payouts once the project clears. That's why they need you gone. You own the last piece they can't touch. Cynthia leaned forward, her voice low. "If you knew all this, why come here now?" Claire's hands trembled as she folded them on the table. "Because it's worse than you think. Red Rock isn't planning simple housing. They want a commercial complex, luxury rentals, shopping strips. Your land is critical. And if you don't back down..." She trailed off, eyes flicking to the revolver resting on the counter. Derek understood. They wouldn't just drown him in paperwork. They'd ruin him, or worse. For hours, the 3 of them pored over the documents. Every page made the picture clearer. Bribery, secret votes, illegal rezoning drafts. The HOA was nothing more than a puppet. Finally, Derek leaned back, exhaustion in his voice but fire in his eyes. "This isn't just about me anymore. They're defrauding the whole community. Every neighbor deserves to know." Claire shook her head. "You go public now, they'll call you a liar. They'll bury you in lawsuits before you can even show the evidence. You need a strategy." "What do you suggest?" Derek asked. Her answer was immediate. "Find allies, people who've been hurt by them too. Once you have enough voices, they can't silence you all." It made sense. And for the first time, Derek felt something stronger than fear. He felt resolve. He would gather his neighbors. He would build a coalition. And together, they would shine a light on the corruption festering beneath their quiet town. But Claire wasn't finished. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Just be careful. They already know you've been digging. And if they find out I've helped you..." She swallowed hard. "We'll both be in danger." Derek reached across the table, his hand firm on hers. "Then we don't stop. We hit them before they hit us." Later that night, long after Claire had left under cover of darkness, Derek stood on his porch. The wind stirred the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an engine idled. Watching, waiting, he tightened his grip on the railing. The line had been drawn. He wasn't backing down. Not now. But if Derek thought exposing the corruption would be simple, he was wrong. Because when he tried to rally his neighbors, he discovered something chilling. Not everyone was on his side. In fact, some were already working against him. So before we dive into that explosive betrayal, make sure you hit subscribe right now, because the next twist will turn this fight into a war. The next weekend, Derek did something bold. He invited a handful of neighbors to his ranch. No HOA oversight, no official meeting. Just residents sitting down together, away from Marjorie's polished lies. He cleared out the barn, set up folding chairs, and laid copies of Claire's documents across a long table. Cynthia brewed coffee, her nervous hands steady only because she knew this mattered. By late afternoon, half a dozen people arrived. Farmers, young couples, retirees. Ordinary folks who had grumbled about HOA fees but never dared raise their voices. Derek stood tall, heart pounding, and began to speak. "They've lied to us. Marjorie and her board aren't protecting property values. They're selling us out to developers who'll bulldoze our land into concrete and strip malls. I have proof, and I'm asking you to stand with me." He passed the papers around. People leaned in, brows furrowing as they read. Murmurs filled the barn. A retired teacher shook his head in disbelief. A young mother whispered, "I knew something was off." For a moment, Derek felt hope. But then the mood shifted. A man in a pressed polo shirt cleared his throat. Alan Bishop, longtime resident, golf buddy of Marjorie's husband. He held up the papers with a smirk. "This," he said, waving the documents. "This is your smoking gun? Emails and scribbles? Looks like paranoia to me. Marjorie's kept this community safe and beautiful for years. And now you, newcomer rancher, want to stir trouble?" The room tensed. Derek stepped forward, voice steady. "Look closer, Alan. Those are contracts with Red Rock. They're planning a multimillion-dollar development. Once it starts, none of us will recognize this place." But Alan only smiled wider. "Maybe some of us want development. Property values will skyrocket. You think everyone here wants to smell cow manure and listen to your tractors all night?" A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably. One even nodded. And in that moment, Derek saw the truth. Not all of them wanted to fight. Some had already been swayed. Maybe promised money. Maybe just seduced by the dream of tidy lawns and bigger house prices. After the meeting, neighbors trickled out. Some clapped Derek on the shoulder, whispering their support. Others avoided his eyes. Alan lingered by the doorway, his smirk never fading. "You should drop this," he said softly, just for Derek to hear. "You don't know who you're up against." Then he left, his footsteps crunching across the gravel like a warning. That night, Derek sat in the dark barn, alone with the scattered papers. Cynthia found him there, shoulders hunched, jaw tight. "They don't all believe me," he muttered. "Some of them want me gone as much as Marjorie does." Cynthia knelt beside him, her voice steady. "Not everyone will stand, but enough will. You don't need them all, you just need proof and the courage to show it." He nodded slowly, but doubt gnawed at him. How do you fight when betrayal comes not just from leaders but from neighbors? The answer came sooner than he expected. 2 days later, a letter appeared in his mailbox. Official HOA stationery, bold and cold. Notice of immediate hearing, non-compliance review. The date was circled in red ink. And at the bottom a signature. Alan Bishop. Derek's hands tightened on the paper. Alan hadn't just disagreed, he joined them. The board had expanded their attack, now backed by neighbors Derek once thought he could trust. That evening, Claire returned with more files. When Derek showed her the letter, her face went pale. "They're accelerating," she said. "They know you're gathering allies. If they can crush you at this hearing, they'll scare everyone else into silence." Derek stared at the letter, his jaw set like stone. "Then we don't let them crush me." But deep down, he knew the stakes had risen. This wasn't just a fight for land anymore. It was a test of loyalty, trust, and survival in a community that was splitting apart. But Derek had no idea just how far his enemies were willing to go. Because on the night before the hearing, something happened on his ranch. Something that turned this battle from politics into open war. So before we reveal what was waiting in the shadows of Derek's land, make sure you hit subscribe right now. The next turn will leave you speechless. The night before the hearing was too quiet. Derek sat on the porch, lantern glowing faintly beside him, listening to the restless shuffle of his animals. The air carried a strange stillness, broken only by the chirp of crickets and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Something wasn't right. He stood, walked the fence line, hand brushing the wood as if the boards themselves could warn him. Then he caught it, the faint, acrid sting of smoke. At first, he thought maybe it was a neighbor burning brush. But as he moved closer to the barn, the smell thickened, sharper, choking. His chest tightened, his eyes widened. Flames, small at first, creeping along the dry timber near the barn's back wall. Then, in a rush, the fire leapt upward, devouring wood like it had been waiting all along. "Cynthia!" Derek roared, sprinting toward the blaze. She bolted from the house, horror etched across her face. Together they fought the ropes and latches, flinging open gates as animals shrieked and scattered into the night. Horses reared, goats bleated, cows surged out into the fields. The barn crackled and popped, fire roaring higher, heat burning their skin even at a distance. Derek pulled the last struggling animal free, coughing from the smoke, when he froze. Two silhouettes. At the edge of the tree line, just beyond the firelight, stood figures, motionless, watching. Neighbors soon rushed in, buckets sloshing, hoses dragging, but it was useless. The barn collapsed in a shower of sparks, the flames swallowing years of work in minutes. Ash rained across the ranch like black snow. The watchers never moved, and when the roof caved in, they turned silently and disappeared into the dark. Derek's fists clenched. This wasn't just intimidation. It was war. Hours later, after the last embers smoldered and the neighbors drifted back home, Derek remained. Ash streaked his face. His clothes smelled of smoke, but his eyes burned brighter than the fire that had destroyed his barn. Claire arrived in the early morning, her car headlights sweeping over the ruins. She stepped out, shock written across her face. "They actually did it," she whispered. "They wanted to scare me," Derek said, voice low but firm. "But all they've done is prove how desperate they are." Claire looked at him, her tone urgent. "This isn't just about rules anymore. If they're willing to burn you out, what do you think they'll do next? Tomorrow, you don't just defend yourself, you expose them." Derek stared at the blackened rubble, jaw set like stone. "Then tomorrow we bring everything. Every file, every document. No more half measures." At dawn, the ranch stood scarred. The barn was gone. The animals grazed nervously in the distance, shadows against the morning sky. Derek walked through the ashes, the crunch beneath his boots sounding like a vow. They had tried to break him. Instead, they had hardened him. Tomorrow, in that hearing room, it wouldn't just be about his land. It would be about justice. The fire was only the beginning, because when Derek walked into that hearing the next day, he wasn't just facing Marjorie or the board, he was stepping into the lion's den. And what unfolded in that room would decide everything. The community hall was packed. Folding chairs lined every inch of the floor. Neighbors squeezed shoulder to shoulder, murmurs echoing like a restless tide. At the front sat Marjorie and her board, smug and polished, papers stacked neatly before them. Alan Bishop leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk plastered on his face. And in the center of it all, Derek. He stood tall, soot still clinging faintly to his clothes from the fire the night before. At his side, Cynthia, steady as a rock. Behind him, Claire clutched her leather bag full of secrets, her eyes sharp despite the fear etched in them. Marjorie's gavel cracked against the table. "This hearing will come to order. We are here to address Mr. Whitfield's blatant noncompliance with community standards." The crowd hushed. All eyes turned to Derek. He stepped forward, his voice steady, carrying through the hall. "Non-compliance? You want to talk about rules? Then let's talk about the rules you've broken." A ripple went through the audience. Derek laid a folder on the table, sliding it toward the board. Pages spilled out, emails, contracts, rezoning drafts. "These are documents showing your deals with Red Rock Development. Secret contracts, bribery, payouts promised once you force me out. This isn't about community harmony. It's about greed." Marjorie's face hardened, but her eyes flickered. Alan snorted, waving a dismissive hand. "Fabrications. Lies from a bitter man who can't follow simple rules." But before Derek could answer, Claire stepped forward. Her voice rang clear. "They're not lies. I was your secretary, Marjorie. I kept those records, and I watched you shred the ones that didn't suit your story. You sold this community piece by piece, and I won't stay silent anymore." Gasps erupted. Neighbors leaned in, eyes wide. The room shifted. Marjorie slammed the gavel again. "Order. This is hearsay. None of this is admissible." But Derek wasn't finished. He raised his voice, letting his fury spill out. "Last night, someone set fire to my barn. My animals barely escaped alive. Do you really think that's coincidence? Or was it just another warning from those who stand to gain if I disappear?" A heavy silence fell. Neighbors exchanged uneasy looks. Some who had doubted Derek now whispered angrily among themselves. The tide was turning. Alan pushed up from his seat, face red. "Enough! This is nothing but a stunt to smear decent people. You don't belong here, Whitfield. Derek stepped closer, eyes locked on Alan. His voice dropped, calm but razor sharp. You're right. I don't belong in your world of backroom deals and burned barns. But I do belong in this community. And so do the people you've been lying to. He turned, sweeping his gaze over the crowd. You have a choice. Stand by a board that's selling you out, or stand together as neighbors and take back what's yours. For a moment, the hall was silent. Then slowly voices rose. Angry, determined. A woman shouted, I never agreed to this. A farmer yelled, We trusted you, Marjorie. The crowd swelled, the noise building like a storm. People stood, demanding answers, calling for resignations. Marjorie's gavel pounded uselessly against the table. Her mask of control cracked, her face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. And for the first time, Derek knew he had won. Not with fists, not with threats, but with truth. Later that evening, Derek stood outside the hall, the cool night air brushing his face. The fire's ruins still scarred his ranch, but in his chest burned something stronger than loss. Hope. Cynthia slipped her hand into his. Claire stood nearby, exhausted but relieved. The battle wasn't over. There would be lawsuits, cleanup, rebuilding. But the board's power had shattered. Their lies dragged into the open. And Derek had proven something that no flames could destroy. He wasn't just a man fighting for land. He was a man fighting for justice. And justice had begun to win. That was Derek's fight against corruption in the heart of his own neighborhood. From secret deals to fire in the night, he stood tall when it mattered most. But what do you think? Was justice truly served? Or will the corrupt always find another way back? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unbelievable true stories.